What's going on, healthy gamers? I am here with Asatar, and we're going to be talking about meditation, beginning meditation, and Asatar has his Ph.D. in economics from the University of Massachusetts, and he was a professor in San Francisco in economics and statistics. So that, you may think, wow, that's how is he qualified to talk about meditation at all? But I'll just let Asatar explain his own life experience of what has brought him to this point. Also, so he works with the University of the Heart, and that's how I found him, just through Google searches. And he writes just profound articles, and it's very interesting. So welcome to the show, Asatar. And can you just talk a little bit about yourself and how you've got to this point now?
Yes, thank you, Jack. Well, I grew up with meditation. The spiritual school that I represent, called the Institute for Applied Meditation on the Heart, we call ourselves I Am Heart for short. And the university that you mentioned is our top-level program. It's a 2-year program in heart-centered meditation, and we call it the I Am University of the Heart, or IMU for short, because our experience of really getting into the heart is that, we're not separate in our hearts. We all feel the same things, and in fact, we're really like we're all one being in that sense. So I had grown up with meditation. I had meditated since a very young age, and after creating my own career, and I even had tenure at City College of San Francisco, I just found that I was much more drawn to helping create this organization than I was at continuing to teach economics and statistics. And so I had done many retreats and trainings and just my own meditation practice daily for many years before I decided to take the next step and make it my actual career.
Fascinating. Sorry, I was listening to what you were saying. I completely lost my train of thought. So, okay, so heart-centered meditation. Can you explain just what heart-centered meditation is?
Yes, it's at the very simplest level, it's feeling your heart. And what I mean by that is the energy of your heart, the emotion of your heart, um, and breathing. And we have a much more advanced techniques, but this is the basis of what we call heart-centered meditation. All kinds of meditation are about being conscious of your breath. Uh, and so we are taking the awareness of the breath and connecting it with the heart. And we mean that physically, so we actually connect with our physical heart. And we also mean it emotionally. What are we feeling? Um, and we also mean it spiritually. So there's there are emotions which are actually bigger than you. They're not personal. There's the recognition that we actually all feel the same emotions, and that there are like when a person says, "This is about the principle. This isn't about me. This is about the principle." What they're saying is, there's something here that matters more than my individual case, that matters even more than my individual feelings. And that's a kind of it's a sign that there are these kind of cosmic emotions which connect everyone, every being really. Um, and so, some traditions say it's about compassion for all sentient beings. Um, and they're tapping into that same reality, that the heart is this spiritual faculty, as well as being about your own personal emotion. And that's really what we focus on. And so we have a technique for it. We actually focus on feeling our physical heartbeat and using that to make our breath very deep and full and rhythmic. So just in a nutshell, we might say, okay, breathe in for 8 heartbeats and then breathe out for 8 heartbeats. And this creates a much slower breath, a much fuller breath, and it is even in terms of the inhalation and the exhalation. And this brings a lot of different kinds of benefits which we document. It's very healthy for your physical heart. It's good for you emotionally, and it has also has spiritual benefits. So we explore each part of that in our curriculum.
Interesting. And I want to touch on all of the meditation and the benefits in a little bit, but you said something that really got my interest, which was kind of the universal emotion, the universal feeling. And this is an idea that I've actually been thinking on very recently. It's kind of the idea that there is information that we learn, and then there's almost a universal truth or a wisdom, if you will, and it's almost as if that like you learn information, but the truth you kind of rediscover. And I guess an example that I'll use for me is one that's about integrity, and it's just keeping your word, doing what you say you're going to do, and never making a commitment that you know you won't keep. And for me, that has felt like a universal truth, like a deep truth. And so I just wanted to get your take on that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's right on. There's things that we just know in our bones, and we don't. A lot of times people tell us the opposite, actually. And like to say, to have that kind of integrity that you're talking about, people sometimes say, well, that's just not practical in the world. And there's a part of ourselves that rebels against that idea. That says, I don't care if it's not practical, it's right. You know, and I'm gonna have that kind of integrity, even if it hurts me. Even if it costs me a job or an opportunity or whatever. And
Sure.
so,
Go ahead.
but we go through those. Sometimes we have to make hard choices in life. Like, well, what are we willing to? Are we really willing to go to bat for this idea or this truth that we know, or are we going to compromise? And so those are. But I think that what you said is right on about there's certain things where we just know, and it's not about knowledge, or it's more about wisdom. It's something that it's bigger than ourselves, and it sort of just feels right. Um, and where does that come from? I mean, well, we say it comes from your heart.
Sure, that's interesting, and that brings it right back to meditation because I think the more that you can quiet down the outer world, the more you know, in tune you can be with that inner voice that kind of guides you along and says, "This is, the universal truth of." Because I think every situation has that. Almost every situation you encounter in life, there is there is an absolute right and a wrong in almost every situation. And I think for myself, practicing meditation daily has been allowed me to really make that distinction. And whenever any sort of decision comes up, I can kind of just quiet myself down and feel, what is the true right thing to do. Not what will get me more profit or what will increase my social status, but what is universally what is the right thing to do.
Yeah, and I think what the thing that makes it complicated is that each person has their own compass. I mean, they have their own standards of right and wrong, their own ideals, and their own things that they must do, and so we each have to have the freedom to be able to. I mean, it's really like what you said. To tune into our own hearts and feel like, well, what is right for me to do now? What is the right thing here? And it can't be given to us. I mean, we have too much of that already. We have, the religions do this traditionally. They write down a bunch of rules and say follow them, and that's coming from a good place. That's meant to try to help people live in the right way. But the reality is you can't do that. You can't follow an external set of rules. You have to follow your own heart. And that's difficult because, there's a lot of pressure on us every day to not follow that and to do what we're told instead.
Sure, and it is almost as if it is a test from the universe to see whether you've truly learned or you're just playing lip service.
Yes. Yes, you could look at it that way. A test from the universe. I like that.
Right. So we're getting really existential there. So let's bring it back to kind of the topic at hand, which is meditation and helping beginners with their own meditative practices. And so I guess one of the we talked about this a little bit earlier too, but one of the main issues for beginners is that they find whenever they try to meditate that their thoughts just go everywhere and their thoughts never still. So can you talk about that and how to overcome it, or is it even
Let
something
me
you should
give you
worry about?
Yeah, let me give you a real simple technique which is very powerful for that. And that is to simply, as you're sitting, just take your hand, either your right hand or your left hand, or you could even try taking both hands and just put them on the center of your chest. You know, neurologically, we are quite tuned to paying attention to what our hands are doing. And if our
Hmm.
hands are on our chest in this manner, then we will psychologically and unconsciously, we will pay attention to this area. And something remarkable happens energetically when we do that, which is that the energy of our thoughts and our emotions settles down into our chest instead of being so focused around our heads. And many different wisdom traditions have talked about the need to just let your energy settle down. And you know, the way we interpret that is to make it more heart centered instead of more mind centered or brain centered. And I think everyone can feel this intuitively. You know, when your thoughts are just kind of rushing around, and you know it tends to be associated with anxiety. It's not pleasant. It's like too much of your energy is up here, and you need it to just come down to your center. And you know, when we look at it, it's very natural for your energy to come down and be centered in your heart. We just have to let it happen and assist it. So I think this is a thing that everybody can do. And, you know, for your listeners here, I would suggest just try this out right now. Place one or both of your hands on your heart and just take a couple of breaths. It can be just as simple as that. Um,
That's as you've been speaking, I've been doing that, and I definitely noticed a change. And it really is hard to verbalize, but I think the way I would describe it is oftentimes, especially after I've had a cup of tea or some caffeine, is my thoughts will they feel like they're speeding faster than I can manage them, and
right.
it feels like a rush of energy. And I think that contributes to the kind of the crash and the coming down later on where you become extremely lethargic. So what I've always kind of intuitively thought is if I can maintain control and go at a steady pace and not be not almost the idea of like when you're running you can lean too far forward and then you almost go out of control, maybe going downhill. And it's that idea of like kind of like what you're saying. What I felt when I put my hand on my heart was that it kind of brought everything down, and it's just more manageable. It's very hard to verbalize.
Well, I'm glad you felt something. That's great.
Yeah, absolutely. So can we? So when a beginner is starting to meditate, can you talk them through the steps of what they're kind of what they should be expecting, what they should be feeling in their head, and what they should be focusing on?
Yeah. You know, my challenge is always to try to give techniques which are going to be manageable for people. I think, you know, it's easy for me to give too many steps and then it becomes overwhelming. So I like to try to just keep it on a real simple level. So I want to just let me give another simple technique, and then, you know, if people want to just combine these two things, that's good. This
Okay.
one just has to do with the way that you sit. So, you know, most of us are going to be sitting in a chair, and it's what I want for this exercise is to sit in such a way so that your weight is really concentrated on the sits bones, which are, you know, that's the upper part of your femur. Um, and so that your weight is really centered on that. And what I want is for you to sit up straight so that your back isn't touching the chair, and then to really actually physically open your chest like you're bearing your heart, really. And you know what we develop this habit of hunching and kind of like closing our hearts, and this is the opposite. This is just like sitting up straight. The head feels like it's just being suspended from a string, as if from above, and just opening your chest and just taking a couple of deep breaths and feeling what that feels like. I've always been really struck by how different it can be to take on a different posture than what you're used to, and how that has a real impact on your thoughts, on your emotional state. So this is my second technique for your listeners, is just to try this out and just see what it does for you.
Fascinating. And there really is science behind different postures because your mental state really does follow your physiology.
Absolutely.
And when you're around, because I'm in the army, and so there are a lot of situations where you're around superiors, and I notice myself automatically closing down, kind of avoiding eye contact, kind of making myself small because I don't want to be the center of attention when a three-star general is around, and that does make you feel small and
Right.
feel kind of insignificant. So I think what you're saying is very interesting. And that actually goes right into the next point I wanted to ask you about was the benefits. What are some of the physical benefits of the heart-centered meditation that you've been talking about?
Well, one of the things we've been really struck by is that there's a whole set of important benefits for your heart of actually breathing in and out through your chest, feeling like that it's your heart that's breathing, and breathing deeply, slowly, and fully, and if you can, in time with your heartbeat. Now, these are kind of more advanced techniques, which we do teach, but if somebody can just do the basic level stuff that we've done so far, that's also very helpful. So the first important benefit is lowering blood pressure. Um, Turns out that breathing slowly and deeply has a tremendously powerful effect to lower blood pressure, and we've had many students in our school that have been able to lower both their systolic and diastolic blood pressure significantly. Um, the other kind of class of benefits is improving. There's a whole set of conditions that are called heart arrhythmia, and there's a whole bunch of different kinds of heart arrhythmia. Like, for example, it's called tachycardia, when your heart speeds up, and this is pretty common for people to just have like this kind of racing heart rate.
Hmm.
Or some people have the opposite of that, which is called bradycardia. And these are different kinds of heart arrhythmia. And so what we've seen again and again with students is that breathing deeply, slowly, rhythmically is tremendously healing for heart arrhythmias. And so people who deal with things like spikes in their heart rate, or what they call dropped heartbeats, or conditions like atrial fibrillation, there's a whole bunch of different kinds of conditions which are precursors of heart disease, which this method is very effective at dealing with. And then there's a whole category of benefits that has to do with stress, and with lowering the effect of the stress hormones on your body. Um, and we teach, our university students are actually, one of our classes is going through a course in this right now, where they look at the pattern of their heartbeat. We use this software which looks at their heart rate variability, which is the beat to beat variation of their heartbeat. And what we look for is a smooth, coherent pattern, so that your heart rate, it's actually, I don't know if you know this, but it's quite unhealthy for your heart if your heart rate is too even. It wants variability,
Hmm.
and if the variability of your heart rate is too low, it's actually a major predictor of mortality of heart disease. So we want variation. Our hearts are constantly having to make this decision of, should I be speeding up right now or should I be slowing down? Like, speeding up is dealing with threat, mobilizing our energies, like, hey, there's a tiger over there, I've got to run. And if our hearts didn't speed up, then we wouldn't have the resources to be able to deal with that. And interestingly, our hearts respond to the thought of a threat in exactly the same way as they respond to an actual threat. They either speed up or they slow down. Like, it's given that there's only two things that the heart can do, it's very complex how, like, from each beat to beat, our hearts are figuring that out. So what we look for is to have a smooth pattern of that. We want the heart to be speeding up and slowing down. And it actually, the ideal pattern for that is there's a medical term for it, which is called respiratory sinus arrhythmia. And what that means is that there's a smooth speeding up and slowing down process that takes place in tune with your breathing. So isn't this fascinating? Your heart rate, if you're breathing correctly, should speed up and slow down in a very smooth wave-like pattern. It really looks like a sine wave
Hmm.
uh, of just gently speeding up and slowing down. And when you feel stressed, your heart is it's doing a very jagged thing. It's speeding up and slowing down, sort of like, if you were to drive a car by slamming on the gas and then slamming on the brakes. It's that kind of thing. And we use software which graphs this. And so we train students to create this optimal RSA pattern. And that conveys a lot of different benefits. And one of the things we notice is that when a person feels stressed, their heart rate gets very jagged like this. Uh, but what we train our students to do is to keep their breathing smooth, deep, and rhythmic. And we notice that it's so powerful that it overwhelms the effect of stress. So we can say, okay, you do your breathing right now. You just take a few breaths within the way that you've been taught. And now think of the most stressful thing to you. I don't even need to know what it is, just because the thought of the stress is as powerful as being in the situation. So just think about that. And what we notice is that if they don't do their practice, their heart rate is all over the place. It's really jagged. But if they do their practice, you can't tell the difference.
Really?
Yeah, it's just smooth. It's very wave-like and very beautiful. And so we this is, I think, a cutting edge of medical research in cardiology. And we don't do that research ourselves. I mean, we're primarily a school of meditation. That's what we do. But we're very interested in all of the new studies that are coming out, which show that this creates this wonderful optimal balance of your nervous system. Your nervous system has these two different parts, which is called the sympathetic, which is like the fight or flight kind of impulse, and the parasympathetic, which is about relaxing. I mean, if your heart beats at 200 beats a minute all the time, it's going to wear out. So your heart is like, okay, well, now the threat has passed. Now it's time to relax. Now it's time to go to sleep. It's time to slow down and enter that phase of the nervous system. So what we want is the heart has this wonderful adaptability and flexibility of being able to say, okay, now it's an emergency, mobilize all resources, and that's the sympathetic. Or, okay, chill, relax. Everything's cool. It's time to be calm. But what happens in modern society, of course, is that we get sort of stuck. We can't easily adapt. There's a lot of things that stress us out, a lot of thoughts out there, and our bodies respond to those thoughts in exactly the same way as they would if there was a tiger right there. I mean, that to our hearts, it's no different. So we're interested in training students to avoid the detrimental physical effects of stress. And of course, I mean, I've only touched on so far on the physical benefits, which are important. But, there's also emotional and spiritual benefits that we're very interested in as well.
Absolutely. And let me just touch on the stress a little bit more, because I talk a lot about cortisol, because a lot of my viewers are younger, and cardiovascular disease is not a massive issue for us right now. But so what they're interested in is how to lose their fat and get a six pack. And that constant stress that you were talking about releases cortisol throughout the body, which makes it very, very difficult to lose belly fat. And so honestly, if you want to look at it just from a pure perspective of reaching your fat loss goals, meditation and doing this, being able to better handle stress, will directly impact how your diet and your fat loss goes. So that's just a side note. But
Good
I want to
point.
ask you more about kind of the mental and the spiritual changes that you see. Maybe it'd be good if you could share a few stories that come to mind about kind of the changes that your students have seen in their own lives after they've started practicing meditation.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we've just completed a new course, a new online course, which is called Heartful Sleep. It's all about applying meditation to sleeping better. Because what we've learned about meditation is really about having some influence over or even control over your state of consciousness or your state of being. And so moving from being awake to being asleep is a change in your state of being, but it's not one that we have direct control over. We have indirect control over it. And so what we've heard from a lot of students in this course in particular, but throughout the years as well, is that um, people are having the ability to slow down at the end of their day, to relax, to be able to go to sleep, and then to be able to wake up. I mean, that's the other side of it. Because I think a lot of people do this. It's like the end of the day, and that's your time, and that's the time where you're not at work, and you kind of want that to go on, and then it's like, oh, now I have to go to sleep so I can wake up early, and it's like there's a certain resistance to that, and there may also be a resistance to changing that state, because when we're awake, we're in control. Um, when we're going to sleep is kind of, well, we have to lose control to do that, and that can be difficult. So we had a student just recently, actually, that gave us a wonderful comment about this course, and he said, I thought this was just going to be about learning how to sleep better, but I see it's really about just the whole thing about, well, what does it mean to be awake? And so that was a really interesting comment. And well, he also said, well, I was having a lot of trouble sleeping before, and now I'm able to sleep a lot better. So, and this is a thing that I've explored somewhat on the blog at imu.org. There's some articles there about sleeping less, and then there's some articles about how to sleep better. And so paying attention to your breath and your heart has that benefit of just becoming more open to different states of being. And one other benefit that people have shared with us over the years is about anxiety. Many people deal with this, of just, this kind of constant low-level fear, and how detrimental that can be, how wearing it can be, and that there's something magical about just slowing down your breathing. And so I would again recommend this to your listeners as something to try out, that when your thoughts are racing and when you feel anxious, just slow down your breathing. I mean, the easiest way to do it, I think we kind of do naturally. We go, right? That's a sigh. It's a much slower breath than probably what we were doing right before that. Um, so we've had people who have had very intense anxiety and then have been able to move on with their lives in a whole different way. I mean, some people who had social anxiety that was just they couldn't even be around other people, and then they became people who spoke in public. So we have like a lot of incredible stories on that level.
That is really fascinating. Where can the viewers go if they want to take the mindful sleeping course?
Well, you can learn more about that at iamheart.org/sleep.
Okay, it's perfect. And that's a really interesting point, because that was how I originally found you about 6 months ago. Was I was Googling can meditation reduce my need for sleep? And I think I left you a message there like at 3 or 4 a.m. because at that time I was staying up until, gosh, 4, 5, 6 in the morning, sleeping until about 3 or 4 in the afternoon. And it was just really bad. But since then, I've become much more disciplined just with my whole life, and I think when I commented, I said I just intuitively felt like I could not accomplish the goals that I had in mind if I were waking up at 3 in the afternoon. I mean, that makes a lot of sense too. But so actually, since then, I've become much more disciplined with my meditation and with my schedule, and I've been able to get up at 5 a.m. regularly now.
Right.
daylight savings time screwed me up a little bit, but getting
Right.
getting back on track. And actually, what you said too about the end of the day being your time and not wanting to go to bed, that I think every gamer would totally resonate with this idea that you just want to squeeze in as much gaming time as you can. You kind of, when you don't feel tired and you're energized and you're excited about the game, you kind of you can it's easy to lie to yourself and say, oh, I'll feel fine in the morning. I can stay up late and I don't need that much sleep until the morning comes. Uh,
Yeah. Yeah.
and so what
Well,
that
what
class
I've
that you talked
noticed
about,
too is
go
that
ahead.
there's different rhythms of the day and of the evening, and this is supported by science. Talks about this circadian rhythms, and then there's micro rhythms within that, and that there's about a 90-minute cycle. And sometimes, like I think everyone's kind of noticed this, that you can be kind of tired in the early evening, and then you can kind of get over that hump, and you feel very energized. And then, maybe that doesn't come around again. Maybe you don't feel that tired again, and then you have to kind of make yourself go to sleep, and then it's harder to kind of slow down. And so it's one of the things that our method of meditation is called heart rhythm meditation. And so we're very interested in all kinds of rhythms that we go through, both on the micro level, like about the beat to beat changes in the heart rate, but also about the macro level, like how does our day go, or how does our week go, or even bigger rhythms. There are kind of emotional or developmental rhythms that take place over months or years, and we're also interested in those.
That's that you just give me so much to think about, and I think that that covers our topic pretty well. We're running on about 32 minutes now, so I really want to thank you for your time. I think you've given some really valuable information to my viewers, and again, I will link to your websites and the IMU, all of the resources there for the viewers to take a look at. I highly recommend it. It's really a really well done website with really great resources that talk about everything and just covers much more than what we've spoken about here. And I would really love to get you back, Asatar, and just talk about different subjects because as we've talked,
Absolutely.
there's so many things I want to talk to you about.
Yeah. Well, I'd love to hear from some of your listeners too. If people have questions, I'd love to be able to address those, but I'd be happy to come back anytime.
Fantastic. Thank you once again, Asatar.